Hey there, it's your old pal Gordon Highland coming to you at 15 frames per second from my little studio Womb with a View here in sunny Kansas City. Possibly pantsless, as is the custom when communicating via webcam. And I, of course, invite you to do the same, should you feel so inclined. I want to talk to you today a little bit about my new novel, Flashover. I'm probably not going to be invited onto The Daily Show or Chelsea Handler or anything like that anytime soon. And my travel budget is probably about the same as yours. So there's no book tour on my immediate radar at the moment. So I just thought I would go direct and forego any kind of cheesy book trailers or whatnot, because you probably feel the same way I do about such things. Plus, I make professional videos all day long at my day job. So it's kind of a nice change of pace to just keep it simple, kick back here with you fine folks for a few minutes. And I'm actually going to be reading from the book, a little selection here in a few minutes, sort of my poor man's virtual in-store appearance type thing. So stick around for that. Again, it's called Flashover. It's my second novel, and it's actually where I would recommend beginning for those of you who've maybe never read my work in the past, because I think it's got pretty broad appeal, in my opinion. A little something for everyone. It's got a mystery story at its core, some supernatural elements and themes, a love story, a lot of laughs along the way, and it's populated with some fun characters who ruin one another's lives in some pretty effed up ways. I think you really dig it. It's a plot-driven novel for sure. And but it also embodies sort of that visceral, sort of bodily type of prose and some deeper characterizations that you would normally associate with literary fiction, I guess you'd call it. But it was important to me to kind of straddle that line, on both accounts to really keep things humming along. I really wanted to go for clarity and specificity, so even the most florid passages are still rooted in really efficient and concise language. It's a pretty easy read, I think you'd say. I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a beach read exactly, maybe more like a lake read, where you're out there, middle of nowhere, floating with a six-pack of Schlitz tall boys within reach, have no idea where you are, haven't seen land in God knows how long, and suddenly realize that you forgot to pack your sunscreen, and maybe you just never learned to swim to begin with. Actually, no, that's probably another book, but you get the idea. Actually, that's the cover artwork, the original source for it right there behind me, painting by my friend Scott Allen. Pretty cool stuff. I guess I should tell you a little bit about the book, sort of a expanded version of the blurb you'll find on the back cover. Our guy Toby, our main character, he's an ex-drummer who had some success in the 90s with his rock bands. He toured the world, and now he's sort of looking for a life of a little more substance. So he settles down in a small rural town in Missouri, about half an hour outside of Kansas City, and starts doing contract labor, wanting to rebuild his life. And one day he's re-roofing a church in the small town that he lives in, and his ladder comes in contact with a power line, and he falls 2 stories to his death via electrocution and flaming, fire, and he's broken a lot of bones and whatnot. And the priest comes out and revives him after, several minutes of death. But the priest is so racked with guilt that he invites Toby to live in the church rectory during his recovery after an extended stay in the hospital, going through various procedures for skin grafts, and also learning that not only is he burned on his hand and his foot very severely, 3rd degree, but he's also been rendered completely deaf as a result of this accident. During this recovery, Toby also realizes that he's developed sort of a pseudo, I guess you'd call it clairvoyance, a gift for reading people. He says that skin speaks to him, like he holds someone's hand and he can tell them something about themselves. But one of his catchphrases he always says is that he's only telling people what they already know. He's not reading the future or anything like that, and he's sort of questioning this ability at the same time because it's all very new and strange to him. While living in the church rectory and recovering, he meets and quickly falls in love with a very enchanting, angelic type of girl named Sarah, and she has a daughter named Daisy, a 5-year-old. And they form a very quick, intense sort of relationship. And one day he wakes up and she's completely vanished, and the rest of the book is about his search for her, having to rely on this ability that he questions, and also, he's become sort of a folk hero in the local town. He's helped a lot of people out with their smaller challenges that provide some of the comic relief in the book, and now he gets to use that ability, alleged ability, sort of, to find this girl. At this time it's personal, and he enlists the police and the FBI. They're no help, so he's sort of on his own there. So now I'm going to read a selection from Chapter 9. Each chapter is titled, and this one is called Carrion. And this finds Toby still in the hospital, going through various procedures early on in his recovery. And this is also shortly after his very first encounter with this so-called ability that he's found out about, that he first noticed when holding hands with his surgeon, Dr. Welliver. Toby couldn't be sure whether he was humming with any articulation or not, as the two-note ostinato of the Jaws theme looped in his throat throughout the transplant. 50 microns between pores, just like human skin, but this composite of shark cartilage, cowhide, and plastic heightened Toby's interest in these mammals, these involuntary organ donors, with which he now communed. His palm was to be comprised of the same hide as the glove that once sheathed it, just as dinners would often come from the very species of the wallet that contained its payment. Would he learn to breathe through his skin, sleep with eyes open, embrace predatory urges? General anesthesia was not an option, due to the compound nature of his other injuries. This explanation sounded like pure sadism to Toby. Even sedated and straddling the edge of consciousness, his own awareness could prove a dangerous side effect, Dr. Welliver said. And though he wouldn't characterize the sensations as pain per se, the deep tissue pressure and alternating tautness and slackness of skin as they rebuilt him triggered such expectations and responses anyway. Only the glints of instrument exchanges were visible above the tinted blue fabric past his elbow, but he filled in his own images. He imagined gremlins, though they reeked like zombies, teeter-tottering on either end of a two-handled crosscut saw, who then power-sanded Toby's palm with 40 grit and dipped it into a bin of broken glass before tidying things up with a staple gun. Deprived of the Debussy raining softly from the speakers, Toby closed his eyes and projected himself back home in Tennessee, his bare toes combing through misted grass in a field bordering the woods. Orange leaves crunching as apple cider and gasoline wafted in the breeze. Nature and humanity, no distinction between the two. He lifted his head and marveled at his tree, his very self, a maple, gnarled and knotted, but limbs forever reaching for the sun. And then they stripped its bark clean with a tin blade. Weeks of nagging protest finally granted Toby a furlough to the sun terrace, courtesy of Nurse Jadana, who wheeled him out there for the duration of her coffee break. Despite the trapezoidal jungle gym holding his pelvis together, he was now able to drag himself around via crutches, but this field trip to the North Wing required a chauffeur. She was clearly destined for her own sitcom, this Nubian fireball with a light bulb figure and infectious smile. Mimes were less expressive, Toby had told her, but hyper-caffeinated bursts of speech rendered her lips unreadable, so she took to clapping her hands to seize Toby's attention, a purely visual cue that reminded him of a filmmaker marking takes for deletion just before the most tedious scenes in a production of his life's story. Between hydrotherapy and catheterization, Jadana had handled Toby's penis more often than his last girlfriend, giving him extortion leverage if his fresh air needs were not met. Perhaps because it was the last time he'd been outside, but the terrace reminded him of the rooftop of St. Anthony's Church, a scene he now recalled with perfect clarity, but always the same inevitable outcome. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair as a wave of motion sickness overtook him, then dissipated just as quickly. The rest of his pre-mortem memories had also resolved and filed themselves into succession following that moment when Dr. Welliver had juiced him with her magic handshake. He often wondered if her cosmic connection had transcended that of merely being God's mechanic. Burn unit staffers on every shift had already warned Toby that oxygen was the enemy of healing, and that maintaining compression, however chronic its pain, would expedite the process while shaping the scar tissue beneath. All he knew was that his custom glove and sock were snug as a whale in a wetsuit and unbearably warm, especially since execution had raised his local sweat glands as well. The burned garments did help cut down on the itching, though. He unzipped the fingertipless gauntlet from his hand and wrist, carefully peeling it off to breathe with the relief of finding a gas station urinal after a six-pack on the road. The reprieve proved short-lived, however, as even modest wind gusts and their hosted bacteria shot ice through his veins upon contact with his raw dermis. The nurse spat out a mouthful of her Rwandan blend when she heard the seething of her patient, stricken with tremors and shallow breaths. Once he re-zipped the gauntlet, she agreed not to tell his doctor if he promised not to act the damn fool and waste her coffee ever again. Time would reveal that searing sunshine to be even more painful than wind. No middle ground between fire and ice. Jadana had been the one to suggest communicating by text message on his mobile phone. One way, of course. Deafness, she confided in one of these messages, just might be Toby's salvation here in the burn unit. It takes a special kind of human, if not an outright dispassionate one, to keep the hourly piercing screams from putting hard mileage on a listener's soul. So throughout the book, the story is kind of jumping all over the place, timeline-wise. It's very non-linear, revealing key information at optimal times. And the story's divided. You cut back and forth between Toby's story and Sarah's story. They're intercut. And I think it's in a pretty unique manner, the way that the stories converge later in the book, and that they race towards a conclusion that is pretty exciting and pretty dark also. It's 276 pages, available in paperback and ebook. Every format that you can think of is out there. You can find all the purchase links, more information, previews, reviews, interviews, whatnot. There's a whole lot of media up at my site. That is GordonHighland.com. You'll find a link here on the page. And right there on the homepage, there'll be a lot of news stories and updates about that, I'm sure. But if you want to, you could always just go directly to the books page, which is GordonHighland.com/Flashover. It's a pretty cool story. My second novel, branching out a little bit, pretty broad appeal. I really hope that you'll pick up a copy and tell a friend if you enjoy it, and maybe post up some words, positive or negative, on Amazon, BarnesNoble.com, especially Goodreads, which is my favorite place. It's a social networking site for book nerds. It's really pretty cool. You can also grab a copy of my previous book, my first novel, Major Inversions, if you like. That's available in paperback and ebook at GordonHighland.com. And just want to thank you for spending a few minutes with me, and hopefully maybe someday I can visit your town.